Maria Rodriguez pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of Blackstone Financial Tower, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished floor. At 42, she had been working as a janitor in this prestigious building for nearly 8 years, invisible to most of the suit-clad executives who hurried past her without so much as a glance. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the lobby as Maria began her routine. She methodically wiped down surfaces, emptied trash bins, and restocked paper towels in the restrooms. Her movements were precise and efficient, honed by years of experience and an attention to detail that most people never noticed. "Excuse me, the bathroom needs more toilet paper," snapped Jennifer Walsh, a young marketing executive with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer suit that probably cost more than Maria made in a month. She didn't even look at Maria as she spoke, treating her like a piece of furniture rather than a human being. "Of course. Miss Walsh, I'll take care of it right away," Maria replied quietly in her soft accent, her voice respectful despite the dismissive treatment. She had learned long ago that responding with dignity was the best way to handle such interactions. As Maria restocked the bathroom supplies, she overheard Jennifer talking to her colleague Sarah in the hallway. "I don't understand why they can't hire people who speak proper English," Jennifer said with a laugh. "Half the time I don't even think she understands what I'm saying." "She's just a janitor anyway," Sarah giggled in response. "I know, right? My maid at home is the same way. They're all the same, these people. Good for cleaning and nothing else." Maria's hands tightened slightly on the paper towel dispenser, but she continued her work without comment. She had heard variations of these conversations countless times over the years. The assumptions, the casual cruelty, the complete disregard for her as a person with thoughts, feelings, and a life beyond these walls. What they didn't know was that Maria had a master's degree in criminal justice from the University of Columbia. What they couldn't see was the 20-year career she had left behind when she immigrated to the United States with her teenage daughter after her husband was killed in Bogota. What they failed to recognize was that the quiet woman who cleaned their offices had once been Detective Maria Elena Rodriguez, one of the most decorated officers in the Colombian National Police. But those were details that didn't matter to people like Jennifer and Sarah. All they saw was the uniform, the accent, and their own preconceived notions about who deserved respect and who didn't. Later that afternoon, Maria was cleaning the executive conference room on the 32nd floor when she noticed the men in expensive suits speaking in hushed tones around the mahogany table. She recognized most of them as senior partners and board members of various companies that rented space in the building. "The shipment needs to be moved tonight," one of them said, glancing nervously toward the door. "The warehouse on 5th Street. Make sure the containers are unmarked." "What about the documentation?" another asked, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Already taken care of. The customs officials have been cooperative." Maria continued dusting the bookshelf, her trained ear picking up fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. These weren't legitimate business dealings. The coded language, the nervous glances, the mention of unmarked containers and cooperative customs officials. It all pointed to something far more sinister than quarterly profit reports. As a detective in Colombia, Maria had spent years investigating organized crime and human trafficking networks. She recognized the patterns, the terminology, the careful way these men spoke around the edges of their illegal activities. Her instincts, dormant for years but never truly gone, began to sharpen. "The girls from the last shipment?" someone asked. "Distributed as planned." "How complications?" Maria's heart pounded as the pieces fell into place. These weren't just wealthy businessmen discussing legitimate imports and exports. They were talking about human trafficking, and from the sound of it, they had been operating right under everyone's noses in this respected financial building. She forced herself to maintain her steady, methodical cleaning routine even as her mind raced. Years of undercover work had taught her how to remain invisible while gathering information, and those skills served her well now. To the men at the table, she was just another piece of the background, a janitor who couldn't possibly understand or care about their important business. "Discussions. Next week's delivery will be larger," the apparent leader continued. "We'll need additional security at the port. What about the new federal task force? I heard they've been sniffing around some of the other operations." "Nothing to worry about. Our contacts in law enforcement keep us well informed. Besides, who's going to suspect anything happening in a building full of lawyers and accountants? As Maria finished dusting the conference room, she made mental notes of everything she had overheard. Names, dates, locations, and most importantly, the clear indication that this trafficking operation had protection from within law enforcement itself. This wasn't just about a few corrupt businessmen. This was a sophisticated network with tentacles reaching into multiple levels of authority. When the men finally left the conference room, Maria remained behind to empty the trash bins. In one of the wastebaskets, she found a crumpled piece of paper with what appeared to be shipping codes and dates. Without hesitation, she smoothed out the paper and memorized its contents before placing it back in the trash. Walking home that evening to her small apartment in Queens, Maria felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had stumbled upon something that could destroy countless lives if allowed to continue. Young women, probably from Latin America like herself, were being trafficked through this operation, and the very people who should be protecting them were instead enabling their exploitation. But Maria also knew the reality of her situation. She was an undocumented immigrant working as a janitor. Who would believe her? Who would even listen to her accusations against powerful, wealthy men who had connections throughout the city's power structure? As she unlocked her apartment door, Maria looked at the photograph on her kitchen table, herself in her police uniform back in Bogotá, receiving a commendation for her work in breaking up a major drug trafficking ring. That woman seemed like a lifetime ago, buried under years of invisibility and quiet endurance. Her daughter Carmen, now 25 and working as a nurse, greeted her with a tired smile.
"How was work today, Mama?"
"The same as always, mija," Maria replied, but her eyes betrayed the turmoil brewing beneath her calm exterior. That night, as Maria lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she found herself at a crossroads she never expected to face again. She could continue her quiet, invisible existence, keeping her head down and her mouth shut like so many others in her situation. Or she could remember who she used to be and find a way to stop the evil she had witnessed. The next morning, Maria arrived at work earlier than usual, her mind still churning from what she had discovered the previous day. She had spent most of the night researching the companies mentioned in the conference room conversation, using her daughter's laptop to carefully piece together connections and corporate structures. As she prepared her cleaning supplies, Maria noticed increased security activity in the building. 2 new guards she didn't recognize were stationed at the main entrance, and she observed several men in dark suits conducting what appeared to be security sweeps of various floors. They're being extra careful, she thought to herself, recognizing the telltale signs of an operation preparing for something significant. Around mid-morning, while cleaning the restrooms on the 15th floor, Maria overheard Jennifer Walsh and Sarah discussing weekend plans. Their conversation was typical office gossip until Jennifer mentioned something that made Maria's blood freeze. "My boyfriend works at the Port Authority," Jennifer said, checking her lipstick in the mirror. "He told me there's some big inspection happening this weekend. Something about a federal task force looking into shipping irregularities." "That sounds boring," Sarah replied, but Jennifer continued. "He's worried because his supervisor told everyone to take the weekend off. Apparently, some high-level people don't want regular staff around during the inspection." Maria continued cleaning the stall doors, but her mind was racing. The trafficking operation she had discovered was about to be inspected by federal authorities, and it sounded like they had advance warning. This meant either the inspection was compromised or worse, it was being deliberately sabotaged from within. Later that day, as Maria was emptying trash bins in the legal offices on the 20th floor, she noticed a familiar face that made her heart skip a beat. Detective James Morrison from the NYPD was sitting in the waiting area of Blackstone, Hartwell and Associates, one of the law firms in the building. Maria recognized him from news reports about various high-profile cases. What disturbed her wasn't his presence alone, but the fact that she had heard his voice the day before. He had been one of the men in the conference room discussing the trafficking operation. A decorated NYPD detective was not only aware of the criminal enterprise but appeared to be actively participating in it. As Maria worked around the law office, she kept her ears open and her head down. Through the partially open door of the senior partner's office, she could hear Morrison talking with someone she now recognized as Robert Blackstone himself. "The task force has been redirected to the Newark docks," Morrison was saying. Our contact at the FBI made sure they're looking in the wrong place this weekend. Excellent. That gives us the window we need to move the next shipment through Brooklyn. What about the manifest alterations? Already handled. The girls will be listed as textile workers on temporary visas. The documentation is flawless. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she dusted the bookshelf outside the office. These weren't just criminals. They were criminals with badges, with federal connections, with the power to manipulate law enforcement itself. The scope of the corruption was far worse than she had initially imagined. As she continued her work, Maria began to formulate a plan. Her years as a detective had taught her that successful investigations required careful documentation and irrefutable evidence. She couldn't simply report what she had overheard. She needed proof that would be impossible to dismiss or cover up. That evening, after her shift ended, Maria took an unusual route home. Instead of her normal subway route, she walked to Brooklyn and spent hours observing the port facilities. Using skills she hadn't employed in years, she noted security patterns, shift changes, and the locations of various warehouses and storage facilities. The warehouse on 5th Street that had been mentioned in the conference room was exactly where she expected it to be, in an industrial area with minimal foot traffic and plenty of privacy for illegal activities. She observed several unmarked trucks coming and going, and noted that security seemed unusually heavy for what should have been a legitimate shipping operation. As she made her way home that night, Maria stopped at an internet cafe in Queens. Using cash and a computer that couldn't be traced back to her, she began researching the federal task force that had been mentioned. What she discovered confirmed her worst fears. The task force was legitimate, led by FBI Special Agent Rebecca Chen, who had built a reputation for dismantling human trafficking networks. But according to recent news reports, their planned inspection of Brooklyn port facilities had been suddenly postponed and redirected to New Jersey. Someone with significant influence had successfully manipulated a federal investigation. Over the next few days, Maria began what she privately called Operation Invisible. Using her status as the building's janitor, she systematically gathered evidence of the trafficking operation. She memorized phone numbers from discarded papers, photographed documents with a small disposable camera hidden in her cleaning supplies, and carefully documented the comings and goings of everyone involved. The pattern that emerged was more sophisticated than anything she had encountered in Colombia. The operation used legitimate businesses as fronts, corrupted officials at multiple levels of law enforcement, and had established what appeared to be a pipeline for trafficking women from Central and South America into forced labor and prostitution. But as Maria gathered more evidence, she also realized she was taking enormous risks. These weren't just wealthy men playing at crime. They were dangerous individuals with the resources and connections to eliminate threats to their operation. Her immigration status made her particularly vulnerable, as she could be disappeared without many people asking questions. The breakthrough came on Friday afternoon when Maria was cleaning the executive conference room again. The same group of men had gathered, but this time their conversation was more urgent and detailed. The shipment arrived Sunday night, the leader was saying. 43 girls ages 16 to 24. They think they're coming here to work in textile factories. Transportation from the port? Morrison's people will handle it. 3 trucks, unmarked, to the Brooklyn safe house. From there, they'll be distributed to locations throughout the tri-state area. Documentation? False work permits, temporary visas. If anyone asks questions, they're legal migrant workers. As Maria listened, she realized this wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. 43 young women were going to arrive in New York in 2 days, expecting legitimate work but instead facing a nightmare of exploitation and abuse. The federal task force that should have been protecting them had been deliberately misdirected. That evening, Maria sat in her small apartment staring at the notebook, where she had carefully recorded everything she had learned. She had detailed names, dates, locations, and methods. She had evidence of corruption that reached into the NYPD and federal law enforcement. She had documented a human trafficking operation that was about to destroy the lives of more than 40 young women. But she also knew that traditional channels for reporting this information were compromised. Detective Morrison's involvement meant that going to the NYPD was not only useless but potentially dangerous. The FBI contact who had misdirected the task force made federal authorities questionable as well. As she looked at her daughter's photograph, Carmen graduating from nursing school, Proud and hopeful about her future in America, Maria realized what she had to do. She couldn't save those 43 girls through official channels. But she wasn't powerless. Detective Maria Elena Rodriguez might have been buried under years of invisibility and survival. But she was still there, still capable, still bound by an oath to protect the innocent that no amount of hardship could erase. That night, Maria made several phone calls using different payphones throughout Queens. By Sunday morning, she would need allies, resources, and most importantly, she would need to remember skills she had spent 8 years trying to forget. The quiet janitor who cleaned offices and emptied trash bins was about to become something else entirely. Saturday morning found Maria in a part of the city she rarely visited, the Upper West Side, where her old contact from the Colombian consulate lived. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been more than just a bureaucrat. She had been one of the few people who helped Maria and Carmen navigate their early years in New York. And more importantly, she was someone Maria trusted completely. Maria, what a surprise, Elena said as she opened her apartment door, immediately noticing the tension in her old friend's face. Come in, please. You look troubled. Over coffee in Elena's comfortable living room, Maria carefully explained what she had discovered. She watched Elena's expression change from concern to horror as the full scope of the trafficking operation became clear. These are not just criminals, Elena, Maria said quietly. They have protection from within the police, from federal contacts. The girls arriving tomorrow night have no idea what they're walking into. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had heard. As a former prosecutor in Bogota before joining diplomatic service, she understood the complexities of fighting organized crime, especially when it involved corrupted officials. What you're describing, Maria, this is not something you can handle alone. Even with your background, even with your skills, you're talking about taking on people with enormous resources and power. I know, Maria replied, but what choice do I have? 43 girls, Elena, 16 to 24 years old. They could be our daughters. Elena studied her friend's face, seeing something she hadn't witnessed in years, the determined expression of Detective Maria Elena Rodriguez, the woman who had once been feared by criminals throughout Bogota. What do you need? That afternoon, Elena made several carefully placed phone calls. Her position at the Colombian consulate had given her contacts throughout various legitimate law enforcement agencies, including some who specialized in international human trafficking cases. More importantly, she had connections to investigative journalists who had built careers exposing corruption and organized crime. While Elena worked her network, Maria spent the day conducting surveillance around the Brooklyn port area. She noted the locations of security cameras, identified escape routes, and most importantly, confirmed the schedule she had overheard in the conference room. 3 unmarked trucks were already positioned near the warehouse district, and she recognized 2 of Detective Morrison's known associates conducting what appeared to be advanced security checks. By Saturday evening, Elena had assembled a small but effective team. Sarah Martinez was an investigative journalist for a major newspaper who had spent years documenting human trafficking networks. Agent David Kim was a federal investigator with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, who had been frustrated by the recent misdirection of his trafficking task force. Most importantly, both had been thoroughly vetted and had no connections to the corrupted officials involved in the operation. This is extremely dangerous, Agent Kim warned as the 4 of them met in Elena's apartment Saturday night. If they discover what we're planning, Maria's immigration status won't protect her and the rest of us could face serious retaliation. The danger is precisely why we must act, Maria replied. Those girls will arrive tomorrow night expecting honest work. Instead, they'll disappear into a system that will destroy their lives. How can we sleep knowing we could have prevented that? Sarah Martinez spread out her laptop and showed them live tracking information she had gathered through maritime shipping databases. The cargo vessel Santa Elena is scheduled to dock at Pier 47 tomorrow night at approximately 11:30 p.m. According to the manifest Maria photographed, it's carrying textile machinery and temporary workers. That's the cover story, Agent Kim confirmed. But if Maria's intelligence is accurate, those temporary workers are actually trafficking victims who have no idea what they're really walking into. The plan they developed was both simple and dangerous. Agent Kim would position himself where he could observe and document the entire operation, while maintaining communication with backup federal units he trusted completely. Sarah would be nearby with camera equipment to gather evidence that could be used both for prosecution and public exposure if official channels proved corrupted. Maria's role was the most risky. Using her knowledge of the building and the criminals involved, she would position herself where she could intervene if the situation went wrong, while also gathering additional evidence about the corruption network. "I need you to understand something," Maria said as they finalized their plans. "These men think I'm invisible. They see a janitor, someone beneath their notice, someone incapable of threatening their operation. That gives me an advantage, but only if I use it carefully." Elena studied her friend with concern. "Maria, you haven't done this kind of work in 8 years. Are you certain you're ready for what might happen tomorrow night?" Maria was quiet for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. She carefully unwrapped it to reveal a service weapon, her sidearm from her days as a detective in Colombia, carefully maintained and hidden for all these years. "This was my grandfather's gun," she said quietly. "He was a police officer in Medellin during the worst years of the cartel violence. My father carried it when he was a detective, and I carried it for 20 years. It saved my life more times than I can count." Agent Kim examined the weapon, a well-maintained Sig Sauer P226, with custom grip panels that bore the inscription "Por la Justicia," for justice. "You kept this all these years?" "I told myself it was for protection, for Carmen's safety in a new country. But I think I always knew that someday I might need to remember who I used to be." As they prepared to leave Elena's apartment, Sarah asked the question that had been weighing on everyone's mind. "Maria, what happens after tomorrow night? Even if we stop this particular shipment, these people won't simply disappear. They have too much money, too much power, too many connections." Maria was quiet for a long moment, checking her weapon and securing it in the holster she hadn't worn in 8 years. "In Colombia, we had a saying, 'La justicia no descansa,' justice never rests. These men have spent years thinking they're untouchable, that people like me are powerless. Tomorrow night, they learn otherwise." The next morning, Maria went through her normal routine at the Blackstone Financial Tower, but everything felt different. She cleaned offices and emptied trash bins with the same methodical precision as always. But her trained eyes were noting details she had ignored for years. Security camera positions, guard rotations, building access points. Around midday, she overheard Jennifer Walsh making plans for Sunday evening. "There's supposed to be some kind of big delivery happening at the docks tonight," Jennifer was telling Sarah. "My boyfriend at the Port Authority says everyone's been told to stay away from Pier 47. Why would anyone want to go to the docks on a Sunday night anyway?" Sarah replied with a laugh. "I don't know, but he seemed really serious about it. Said it was some kind of federal operation or something." As Maria continued her work, she realized the criminals' advance warning system was even more extensive than she had suspected. Information was flowing through multiple channels, from federal contacts down to Port Authority workers, ensuring that their operation could proceed without interference. That evening, as her shift ended, Maria looked around the building that had been her workplace for 8 years. Tomorrow, if everything went according to plan, her life would change completely. The quiet janitor who had been invisible to the powerful men in their expensive suits was about to make them see her very clearly. As she walked toward the subway, Maria felt the familiar weight of her weapon against her side and the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, 43 young women were approaching New York Harbor, hopeful about their futures and completely unaware of the danger they were sailing toward. But tonight, Detective Maria Elena Rodriguez would be waiting for them. Sunday evening at 10:15 p.m., Maria crouched behind a shipping container approximately 200 meters from Pier 47, her heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and fear she hadn't experienced in 8 years. Through her small binoculars, she could see the cargo vessel Santa Elena approaching the dock, its lights cutting through the darkness of New York Harbor. Her earpiece crackled softly with Agent Kim's voice. "Vessel is on schedule. I count 3 trucks positioned near the warehouse just as you reported. Multiple security personnel, at least 6 that I can identify. Camera positions confirmed," Sarah Martinez whispered from her concealed location on the adjacent pier. "I have clear sight lines to document everything." Maria adjusted her position slightly, feeling the unfamiliar weight of her tactical vest, borrowed from Agent Kim's equipment, and the familiar comfort of her grandfather's weapon secured in its holster. For the first time in 8 years, she felt like herself again. As the Santa Elena tied up to the dock, Maria observed the operation's sophisticated coordination. Detective Morrison emerged from one of the trucks speaking into a radio, while surveying the area with practiced efficiency. 2 Port Authority officials she didn't recognize were directing the cargo operation, but their movements seemed too coordinated, too purposeful for routine dock workers. "The girls are being offloaded now," Agent Kim reported. "I count 42, maybe 43 individuals. They appear confused, frightened. Most are carrying small suitcases or bags." Through her binoculars, Maria could see young women being herded off the vessel by men posing as transportation officials. Even from a distance, she could see their bewildered expressions, the way they clutched their belongings, the hopeful but uncertain way they looked around at their new country. Her throat tightened as she recognized herself in those faces, the same mixture of hope and fear she had felt when she first arrived in New York with Carmen, believing in promises of a better life. "They're being divided into groups," Sarah observed. 3 separate trucks, about 14 to 15 girls each. Maria watched as the young women were directed toward the waiting vehicles. Some were asking questions in Spanish, their voices carrying across the water, but the men were giving them reassuring answers, telling them this was normal procedure for new workers, that they would be taken to their dormitories to rest before beginning their jobs tomorrow. "First truck is loaded and moving out," Agent Kim reported. "Morrison is in the passenger seat." This was the moment Maria had been preparing for. According to the plan she had overheard in the conference room, the first truck would take its passengers to a warehouse in Queens, where they would be processed and prepared for distribution to various locations throughout the tri-state area. Once that processing began, the girls would disappear into a network that would be almost impossible to trace. "I'm moving to intercept," Maria whispered into her microphone. "Maria, wait for backup units," Agent Kim urged. "We have federal agents en route." "By the time they arrive, those girls will be gone," Maria replied, already moving from her concealed position. "Stick to the plan." As she made her way through the maze of shipping containers and dock equipment, Maria felt her police training taking over. Her movements became fluid and purposeful, her senses sharpened to a degree she had almost forgotten was possible. Years of cleaning floors and emptying trash bins fell away, replaced by the focused intensity that had made her one of Colombia's most effective detectives. The route to the Queens warehouse would take the trucks through an industrial area with minimal traffic and limited police presence. Perfect for criminal operations, but also perfect for an intervention. Maria had spent the previous afternoon identifying the optimal intercept point, a narrow underpass where the trucks would be forced to slow down and where escape routes would be limited. Reaching her predetermined position, Maria checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. If Morrison's truck maintained normal speed, it would reach this location in approximately 12 minutes. Agent Kim's backup units were still at least 20 minutes away. As she waited in the darkness beside the underpass, Maria thought about the 43 young women who were experiencing the worst night of their lives without even knowing it yet. They had left their families, their countries, their entire lives behind, believing in promises of honest work and a chance for a better future. Instead, they were being transported to a nightmare that would destroy everything they had hoped to become. "First truck approaching your position," Agent Kim's voice crackled through her earpiece. 2 additional vehicles following approximately 3 minutes behind. Maria could see the headlights approaching, moving at moderate speed through the empty industrial streets. As the truck entered the underpass, she stepped into the roadway and raised her weapon, her tactical light illuminating the cab. "NYPD, stop the vehicle!" she shouted, using the authority voice she had perfected during her years as a detective. The truck's brakes squealed as it came to an abrupt halt. Through the windshield, Maria could see Morrison's surprised face as he reached for his own weapon, his expression changing from shock to recognition to fury. "You," he said as he stepped out of the truck, his gun drawn but not yet aimed. "The building janitor. What the hell do you think you're doing?" "What I should have done days ago," Maria replied, keeping her weapon trained on him while positioning herself so she could see the truck's driver as well. "Step away from the vehicle, Detective Morrison." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, lady. You're going to get yourself killed, and for what? A bunch of illegal immigrants who don't even belong in this country? They're human beings and you're trafficking them like cargo. The truck's driver, a large man with gang tattoos covering his neck, was slowly reaching for something under his seat. Maria shifted her aim slightly. "Driver, put your hands where I can see them now." "You think anyone's going to believe you?" Morrison continued, apparently trying to buy time while figuring out how to handle the situation. "An undocumented janitor with a gun? I'm a decorated NYPD detective. Who do you think has credibility here?" "The same credibility you use to misdirect a federal task force?" Maria asked. "The same credibility you've been using to protect a human trafficking network?" For the first time, Morrison's confident expression wavered slightly. He hadn't expected her to know about the federal investigation. Hadn't anticipated that the invisible janitor might have been gathering intelligence on his operation. From inside the truck, Maria could hear frightened voices speaking in Spanish. Young women asking what was happening, why they had stopped. Their fear was palpable, but they had no idea that the woman holding a gun on their captors might be their only chance at freedom. "Maria, second truck approaching your position," Agent Kim warned through her earpiece. "You need to end this quickly. Detective Morrison, you have 5 seconds to step away from the truck and place your weapon on the ground," Maria said, her voice calm but absolute. After that, this situation becomes much more complicated for everyone involved. Morrison's eyes narrowed as he calculated his options. He had backup coming. He was armed, and he probably assumed that a middle-aged janitor wouldn't have the nerve or skill to follow through on her threat. "You know what I think?" Morrison said, beginning to raise his weapon. "I think you're bluffing." The shot that rang out through the underpass was precise and professional, striking Morrison's gun hand and sending his weapon spinning away across the pavement. The detective dropped to his knees, clutching his wounded hand and staring up at Maria with a mixture of pain and disbelief. 20 years with the Colombian National Police," Maria said quietly, keeping her weapon trained on the truck driver who had frozen with his hands partially raised. "Specialized in organized crime and trafficking networks. You want to find out what else I remember, detective?" As sirens began wailing in the distance, Maria realized that Agent Kim's backup units were finally approaching. But she also knew that the second and third trucks were still out there, carrying 28 more young women toward the same nightmare she had just prevented for the 14 girls in Morrison's truck. "This is Agent Kim." Her earpiece crackled. "We have the first location secured, but we need to move quickly on the other 2 trucks." Maria looked at Detective Morrison, who was staring at her with newfound recognition and fear. The quiet janitor he had ignored for years had just demonstrated that she was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "Tell your people to release the other girls," Maria said, "or find out what else Detective Maria Elena Rodriguez remembers about dealing with traffickers." Within minutes, the underpass was flooded with federal agents, NYPD units, and emergency medical personnel. Detective Morrison was being treated for his gunshot wound, while Agent Kim supervised the careful extraction of the 14 young women from the truck. Maria watched as paramedics checked each girl for injuries and social workers began the delicate process of explaining their situation. "Maria Elena Rodriguez," Agent Kim said, approaching her with a mixture of respect and concern. "That's your real name, isn't it?" Maria nodded, finally lowering her weapon as the scene became secure. "Detective Maria Elena Rodriguez, Colombian National Police, retired. Well, Detective Rodriguez, you just prevented 14 young women from disappearing forever. But we still have 28 more out there in 2 other trucks." Sarah Martinez appeared from behind one of the federal vehicles, her camera equipment documenting everything. "I got it all," she said breathlessly. "Morrison's involvement, the trafficking operation, everything. This story is going to expose the entire network." But Maria's attention was focused on something else. Through Morrison's radio, which had been secured as evidence, she could hear panicked communications between the other trucks and their coordination center. "Unit 2, respond. What's your status?" "We heard gunshots." "Unit 2, come in immediately." Agent Kim handed Maria a headset connected to Morrison's radio. "Think you can help us locate the other trucks?" Maria took the headset, her mind already working through the possibilities. "In Colombia, when we intercepted trafficking operations, the remaining vehicles always had predetermined rally points, secure locations where they could regroup if the primary plan was compromised." She keyed the radio microphone, adopting Morrison's authoritative tone. "Unit 2, Unit 3, this is Morrison. We have a federal situation at the primary location. Execute fallback protocol 7. Rendezvous at the alternate warehouse for new instructions. There was a brief pause, then a crackling response. Confirmed, detective. Proceeding to the Brooklyn alternate. Eat did 20 minutes. Agent Kim looked at Maria with admiration. How did you know they would have fallback protocols? Because these aren't amateurs, Maria replied. The level of organization, the corruption network, the advanced warning systems, this is sophisticated criminal enterprise. They plan for contingencies. While federal units raced to position themselves around the Brooklyn alternate warehouse, Maria found herself speaking with the 14 girls who had been rescued from Morrison's truck. Most were from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, ranging in age from 16 to 23. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar. Families in desperate poverty, promises of factory jobs in America, recruitment through networks that presented legitimate opportunities. Señora, one of the youngest girls asked in Spanish, "Are we in trouble? Are they going to send us back home?" Maria knelt down to the girl's eye level, speaking gently in her native language. "No, mija, you're not in trouble. You were brought here by bad people who lied to you. But you're safe now." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "My family borrowed money to pay for my transportation. They said I would work in a clothing factory and send money home. What will happen to my family?" It was a question that cut straight to Maria's heart, because she understood the impossible choices these families had made. Desperate poverty forcing them to trust people who promised opportunities that seemed too good to be true, but were often the only hope they had. "We're going to help you figure that out," Maria promised. "But first, we need to help your friends who are still in danger." Agent Kim approached with an update from the Brooklyn operation. Both remaining trucks arrived at the alternate warehouse. "We have the location surrounded, but they're not coming out voluntarily. We count approximately 6 armed individuals inside, plus the 28 girls. Have you tried negotiating?" Maria asked. "They're demanding safe passage in exchange for releasing the hostages. But we know if we let them go, they'll just relocate the operation somewhere else." Maria studied the tactical map Agent Kim showed her, noting the warehouse layout and surrounding streets. "In Colombia, we learned that trafficking operations like this always have emergency protocols for destroying evidence. If they feel trapped, you think they might hurt the girls? I think they'll do whatever they believe is necessary to protect their larger operation. These 28 girls are valuable to them, but they're not irreplaceable." Sarah Martinez had been monitoring police communications and news feeds on her equipment. "There's something else you need to know," she said grimly. "Word is already spreading through their network. I'm picking up radio chatter about cleaning house and eliminating loose ends. The implications were chilling. The trafficking network knew their operation had been compromised, and they were moving to protect themselves by destroying evidence, which likely included eliminating anyone who could testify against them." "Agent Kim," Maria said, making a decision that surprised even herself. "I want to go in there." "Absolutely not. You're a civilian now and this isn't your jurisdiction." "But it is my fight," Maria replied firmly. "Those men in the warehouse don't know who I am. They think Maria Rodriguez is just a janitor who got lucky tonight. They have no idea they're dealing with someone who spent 20 years infiltrating operations exactly like this one." Elena Vasquez, who had arrived with the federal response team, stepped forward. "Maria, you've already done enough. You've saved 14 girls and exposed a major trafficking network. Let the professionals handle the rest." "The professionals had their investigation misdirected," Maria pointed out. "The professionals have been compromised by the same corruption network we're fighting. Those girls in that warehouse need someone who understands how these operations work. Someone who knows how to get inside their defenses." Agent Kim was quiet for a long moment, studying Maria's determined expression. "What are you proposing?" "Let me make contact. I can approach as Detective Morrison's backup, someone they might recognize from the building but don't see as a threat. While I'm distracting them, your tactical teams can position for a coordinated intervention. That's incredibly dangerous. If they discover who you really are, then I'll handle it the same way I handled Detective Morrison." As if summoned by their conversation, Morrison himself appeared, handcuffed and escorted by federal agents. His wounded hand was bandaged, but his eyes were filled with rage as he spotted Maria. "You have no idea what you've started," he said venomously. "These people don't forgive and they don't forget. You think saving a few illegal immigrants makes you some kind of hero? You've just painted a target on yourself and everyone you care about. Maria met his gaze steadily. Let me worry about that, detective. Right now, I'm more concerned about the 28 girls you were planning to sell. They're not being sold, Morrison protested. They're being given opportunities they never would have had in their home countries. Opportunities? Maria's voice carried the controlled fury of someone who had seen too much human suffering. You mean opportunities to be raped, beaten, and forced into prostitution? Opportunities to disappear so completely that their families will never know what happened to them? Morrison's expression shifted, and for the first time Maria saw something that might have been shame flicker across his features. But it was quickly replaced by defensive anger. You don't understand how the world works. These girls were coming here illegally anyway. At least this way they serve a purpose. The purpose of making you and your associates rich while destroying their lives. Agent Kim stepped between them before the conversation could escalate further. Detective Rodriguez, if we're going to attempt your plan, we need to move quickly. My sources indicate the warehouse situation is becoming increasingly unstable. Maria nodded, then turned to Elena. If something happens to me tonight, make sure Carmen knows that I died doing the job I was always meant to do. Nothing is going to happen to you, Elena replied firmly, because you're not going in there alone. Elena, you're not trained for this kind of operation. No, but I am, Agent Kim said. If you're determined to do this, Detective Rodriguez, then we do it together. I've been hunting trafficking networks for 8 years, and I've never been this close to taking down an operation this large. As they prepared for what would essentially be an undercover infiltration of a hostile situation, Maria felt the familiar pre-operation focus settling over her mind. The nervous energy, the heightened awareness, the cold calculation of risks and possibilities that had kept her alive through dozens of dangerous assignments in Colombia. But this time was different. This time, it wasn't just about justice or duty or even protecting innocent victims. This time it was personal. For 8 years she had been invisible, dismissed, treated as less than human by people who saw only what they expected to see. Tonight she was going to show them exactly who they had been underestimating. 28 young women were counting on her, even though they didn't know it yet. And Detective Maria Elena Rodriguez had never failed to bring her people home. At 1:30 a.m., Maria and Agent Kim approached the Brooklyn warehouse using carefully planned cover identities. Maria carried cleaning supplies and wore her janitor uniform, while Agent Kim posed as a private security contractor, hired to assist with the emergency relocation. Their story was simple but believable. They were there to help clean up the situation Morrison had created. The warehouse district was eerily quiet except for the occasional sound of trucks in the distance. Federal tactical teams were positioned around the perimeter, invisible but ready to move on Maria's signal. Sarah Martinez had found a position where she could document whatever happened next. Her camera equipment ready to capture evidence that would be crucial for prosecuting the entire network. Remember, Agent Kim whispered as they approached the warehouse entrance. These people are desperate now. They know their operation is compromised, which makes them extremely dangerous. Maria nodded, checking her concealed weapon one final time. In Colombia, we called this la hora de la verdad, the hour of truth. When criminals realize they're trapped, that's when you see who they really are. The warehouse door was guarded by 2 men with automatic weapons, serious firepower that confirmed how valuable they considered their cargo. Maria recognized one of them as Vincent Caruso, a known associate of Detective Morrison who occasionally visited the Blackstone Financial Tower. Vincent, Maria called out in accented English, playing up her role as the building janitor. Detective Morrison, he sent me to help with the cleaning. Big mess tonight, yes? Caruso squinted at her in the dim lighting, trying to place her face. You're the cleaning lady from the tower. What are you doing here? Morrison, he call me. Say emergency cleaning needed. Very important people coming tomorrow need warehouse spotless. She gestured to her cleaning supplies. I bring everything. The second guard looked suspicious, but Caruso seemed to accept her explanation. After all, who would suspect a middle-aged janitor of being involved in a law enforcement operation? Fine, but make it quick. We're moving out soon. As they entered the warehouse, Maria's trained eyes immediately assessed the tactical situation. 6 armed men were positioned around the large space, while the 28 young women sat huddled together in one corner, watched over by 2 guards. The girls looked terrified and confused, clearly having no idea what was happening or why they were being held. "Where is Detective Morrison?" Agent Kim asked, maintaining his security contractor persona. "Delayed," replied a man Maria recognized as Robert Blackstone himself. "We're implementing alternate protocols until he arrives." Blackstone's presence confirmed that the trafficking network reached to the very top of the building she had cleaned for 8 years. The respected attorney who had ignored her existence was actually one of the operation's primary organizers. "What's the timeline for relocation?" Agent Kim continued, gathering intelligence while Maria began her cleaning routine, positioning herself closer to the hostages. "Transport arrives in 90 minutes. Different route, different destination. This whole operation gets burned and rebuilt somewhere else." As Maria worked, she began speaking quietly to the girls in Spanish, pretending to mutter complaints about the mess while actually gathering information about their condition and preparing them for what might happen next. "Stay calm," she whispered to a young woman near the edge of the group. "Help is coming, but when I give the signal, everyone needs to get down on the floor immediately." The girl nodded almost imperceptibly, then began quietly passing the message to the others. "Cleaning lady," Blackstone called out irritably. "Hurry up with that. We don't have all night." "Yes, sir." "Very sorry, sir," Maria replied in the subservient tone she had perfected over 8 years of being invisible. "Almost finished." But as she moved closer to the center of the warehouse, one of the guards stepped directly into her path. Unlike the others, this man was studying her face with uncomfortable intensity. "I know you," he said slowly. "You're not just a janitor." Maria's blood ran cold as she recognized him. Carlos Mendoza, a former Colombian military officer who had fled the country after being implicated in several disappearances. If he identified her as Detective Maria Elena Rodriguez, the entire operation would collapse. "I clean offices," Maria said carefully, maintaining her accent and subservient posture. "Every day, same building, same people. Maybe you see me before." Mendoza continued staring at her, his expression growing more suspicious by the second. "No, it's something else. Something about your eyes, the way you move." Agent Kim had noticed the confrontation and was slowly positioning himself to intervene, but any sudden movement would likely trigger a firefight with 28 hostages in the crossfire. "Carlos," Blackstone called out impatiently. "What's the problem?" "This woman. I think I know her from Colombia." The warehouse fell silent except for the frightened whispers of the hostages. Maria realized that her cover was about to be blown, and with it any chance of rescuing the girls without a violent confrontation. "Colombia is big country," Maria said, still trying to maintain her facade. "Many people, very poor. Maybe your family, my family, we live in same neighborhood sometime." But Mendoza was no longer listening to her words. His hand was moving toward his weapon as recognition dawned in his eyes. "Detective Maria Elena Rodriguez," he said with certainty. "You destroyed my unit in Bogota. Cost me everything." The moment Mendoza spoke her real name, everything changed. The other guards began reaching for their weapons. Blackstone's expression shifted from irritation to alarm, and Agent Kim prepared to draw his firearm, but Maria was already moving. Years of training and instinct took over as she dropped her cleaning supplies and drew her grandfather's weapon in one fluid motion. Her first shot took down Mendoza before he could clear his holster, while simultaneously shouting in Spanish to the hostages, "Al suelo. Ahora. Get down, now!" The 28 girls immediately dropped to the floor as Agent Kim opened fire on the guards nearest to them. The warehouse erupted in gunfire and chaos as federal tactical teams breached the building from multiple entry points. Maria dove behind a stack of shipping crates, using her position to provide covering fire while the hostages crawled toward the safety of the tactical teams. Through the chaos, she could see Blackstone trying to escape through a rear exit, but Agent Kim's backup units were already in position. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," voices shouted from multiple directions as the tactical teams established control. Within minutes, the gunfight was over. 2 of the trafficking guards were dead, 3 others wounded and in custody. Most importantly, all 28 hostages were safe and unharmed. As the dust settled, Maria found herself standing in the middle of the warehouse, her weapon still drawn, surrounded by federal agents and freed hostages. For the first time in 8 years, she felt completely like herself again. Agent Kim approached her with a mixture of respect and amazement. "Detective Rodriguez, that was some of the finest tactical work I've ever witnessed. But Maria's attention was focused on the young women who were being checked by paramedics and interviewed by social workers. Each face reminded her of her own daughter, of her own journey to America, of the hopes and dreams that had nearly been destroyed by the criminals who saw human beings as nothing more than profitable cargo. "Señora," one of the girls approached her tentatively. "You saved us, but why? We are nobody, nothing special." Maria looked at the young woman, probably 18 years old, with intelligent eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work and determination, and saw everything worth fighting for. "You are everything special, mija. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." As dawn broke over Brooklyn, 42 young women who had expected to begin new lives as factory workers were instead beginning new lives as survivors and witnesses to one of the largest human trafficking networks ever exposed in New York. And the quiet janitor who had been invisible for 8 years had reminded the world that justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. 3 months later, Maria stood in a federal courthouse in Manhattan wearing a crisp business suit instead of her janitor uniform. The media attention had been overwhelming. The story of the invisible janitor who brought down a major trafficking network had captured national attention, largely thanks to Sarah Martinez's detailed reporting and photographic evidence. The trials had moved quickly once the full scope of the corruption was revealed. Detective Morrison, faced with irrefutable evidence and the testimony of 42 rescued victims, had accepted a plea agreement in exchange for providing information about the network's operations in other cities. Robert Blackstone and 6 other attorneys from his firm were facing federal trafficking and racketeering charges that would likely result in life sentences. But for Maria, the most important moment had come 2 weeks earlier, when she received her badge and credentials as a special agent with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Agent Kim had personally recommended her for the position, and the agency had been eager to recruit someone with her unique combination of experience and language skills. "Agent Rodriguez," Elena Vasquez said, approaching her in the courthouse hallway. "How does it feel to be back in law enforcement?" "Different," Maria replied honestly. "In Colombia, we were fighting cartels and drug trafficking. Here, the criminals wear expensive suits and hide behind badges and law degrees. But the work is the same, protecting people who can't protect themselves." Through the courthouse windows, she could see protesters gathered outside. Some carried signs supporting stricter immigration enforcement, while others demanded better protection for trafficking victims. The case had become a flashpoint for national debates about immigration policy, law enforcement corruption, and the treatment of undocumented workers. "The girls?" Helena asked. "All 42 have been granted special visas as trafficking victims. Most are in witness protection programs until the trials conclude. But they're safe. Several have already started classes to learn English and job training programs." Carmen Rodriguez appeared in the hallway, now working as a victim advocate for the federal prosecutor's office. Maria's daughter had left her nursing job to help coordinate services for the rescued women, finding her own calling in ensuring they received proper medical care and psychological support. "Mama," Carmen said, embracing her mother, "the prosecutor wants to speak with you before the final sentencing hearing." As they walked toward the prosecutor's office, Maria reflected on how completely her life had changed. The small apartment in Queens had been replaced by a larger place in a safer neighborhood. The cleaning cart and janitor uniform had been replaced by federal credentials and investigative authority. But most importantly, the years of being invisible and dismissed had been replaced by recognition and respect. "Agent Rodriguez," Federal Prosecutor Amanda Chen greeted her as they entered the office. "I wanted you to know that this case has already led to investigations in 6 other cities. The network you exposed was much larger than we initially realized. Any additional arrests?" 14 so far, including 2 federal employees and a federal judge who had been providing the network with advance warning about investigations. "Your infiltration didn't just save 42 girls. It likely prevented hundreds of others from being trafficked." Later that afternoon, Maria found herself back at the Blackstone Financial Tower for the first time since the night of the warehouse raid. The building management had invited her to a ceremony recognizing her heroism, but she had a different purpose for her visit. Jennifer Walsh was still working on the 15th floor, though several of her colleagues had been implicated in the trafficking network and arrested. When Maria stepped off the elevator wearing her federal badge and credentials, Jennifer's expression was a mixture of shock and discomfort. I remember you, Jennifer said hesitantly. You used to clean here. I still work here occasionally, Maria replied calmly. Federal investigations sometimes require us to return to crime scenes. Jennifer's face flushed as she realized the implications. For months, she had treated Maria as invisible, making dismissive comments about her intelligence and worth. Now she was facing a federal agent who had been listening to every word. I want you to know, Jennifer said quietly. I'm sorry about the things I said, the way I treated you. I had no idea. You had no idea because you chose not to see me as a person, Maria replied. The uniform, the accent, the job, none of that changes someone's worth or capabilities. I hope you remember that in the future. As Maria left the building, she reflected on the irony of the situation. For 8 years, she had been truly invisible to the people who worked there, dismissed and ignored because they couldn't imagine that the quiet janitor might be someone important. That invisibility had ultimately been their downfall, allowing her to gather the intelligence that destroyed their criminal enterprise. That evening, Maria attended a celebration dinner with the 42 women she had helped rescue. Many had learned enough English to express their gratitude directly, while others spoke through translators. But the message was the same. These young women who had been treated as cargo, as disposable property, were rebuilding their lives with dignity and hope. Agent Rodriguez, said Patricia, the 18-year-old who had approached her in the warehouse. I start college classes next month. Business administration. Someday I want to help other people the way you helped us. And you will, Maria assured her. You all will. As the dinner wound down, Agent Kim approached with news about their next assignment. We've received intelligence about a trafficking operation in Miami, with connections to the network we dismantled here. The victims are being brought in through cruise ship operations. Interested in an undercover assignment as a cruise ship maintenance worker? Maria smiled, thinking about how her years of experience being underestimated and overlooked had become her greatest professional asset. When do we start? Later that night, as Maria looked through her daughter's photo albums, she came across pictures from their early years in New York, herself in her janitor uniform looking tired and defeated, trying to rebuild a life in a country that seemed determined to ignore her existence. But there was another photo that caught her attention. One Carmen had taken secretly just a few weeks ago. Maria was teaching a self-defense class to some of the rescued trafficking victims, helping them develop the confidence and skills to protect themselves. In the photo, she was wearing her federal badge, and her expression showed the same determined focus that had made her a successful detective in Colombia. The quiet janitor who had been invisible for 8 years was gone. In her place stood Special Agent Maria Elena Rodriguez, protector of the vulnerable and hunter of those who would exploit them. The badge on her chest bore the same inscription as her grandfather's gun, Por la Justicia, for justice. Some people spent their entire careers trying to make a difference in the world. Maria had learned that sometimes the biggest difference comes from remembering who you really are, even when the whole world seems determined to forget. As she prepared for bed, Maria checked her service weapon, her grandfather's Sig Sauer, now officially registered as her federal sidearm. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new victims to protect, new criminals to stop. But tonight she would sleep peacefully, knowing that 42 young women were safe because someone had refused to remain invisible when it mattered most. The identifier on the firearm read, Property of Special Agent M.E. Rodriguez, ICE. But more than that, it represented a legacy of justice that had passed from grandfather to father to daughter, and would continue long after her own career ended. Sometimes the most powerful people in the world are the ones nobody bothers to notice.